In this series, on which I've already had very good feedback, if I say so myself, and it's all down to the fantastic speakers that we've had so far and that we've still got lined up for the rest of the series. The series is trying to take a really broad perspective on understanding impact and knowledge exchange. We're trying to look across sectors and the different types of stakeholders. We have academic voices from HEFKI, from other funding bodies, voices from users and the wider public. We're also trying to take a cross-disciplinary view, so we can draw not only on expertise and thinking around impact in one set of disciplines, in the social sciences, but also to bring insights from a range of other disciplines, from the humanities, from the sciences and medical research. We're also trying to take a cross-national perspective, so we will have, and we have had already, a number of perspectives which are very much geared to the context of the UK, but we're also drawing in perspectives from other countries, including next week's speaker, who's going to be talking about the UK, but with an international perspective on. And also in the last week of the series, we'll have a perspective from Australia. We're also trying to be quite all-encompassing in terms of ways of looking at impact, of capturing impact, and impact techniques and metrics. So we're looking all the way from metrics. We had somebody talking about the metrics review in week 1, through a range of other methodologies, and all the way to a very open narrative accounts of impact. I hope that this will be yet another opportunity for critical engagement with issues around impact, and knowing our speaker for today, I'm pretty certain that this will be so. I'm really delighted to welcome you back to Oxford, Eleonora. Professor Eleonora Belfiore is Associate Professor in Cultural Policy at the University of Warwick, where she also leads, or has led, the Warwick Commission on Cultural Value. And she's also been involved in a metrics review, a HEFKI metrics review, where I trust you're expressing a strong humanities voice, she says. Professor Belfiore has written extensively on topics around impact, around value, capturing value, the social value of research. And 2 of her books are always on the shelf nearest to my desk, and that's the social impact of the arts and humanities in the 21st century. But please do explore more of her work. So I look forward to your talk, Eleonora.
Thank you very much. Slightly pressurising introduction. Thank you very much, Alice. I think the title of my presentation to you today reveals that what I've prepared for you today is very much a personal reflection of my experience of being either a publicly engaged academic, which is my preferred or a champion, an impact champion, which is what my university calls me. So I think I'd start with a little bit of an introduction, building on what Alice has just said about me. Also because I've been in the field long enough to know that usually when I tell people that my area of work is cultural policy studies, usually people go, look at me slightly blankly. So I wanted to avoid you having to sit looking at me blankly for 40 minutes, and I'd like to explain at the outset what it is that I do. I'm interested in the politics of cultural policy making, which in other terms means I research, I'm interested in the reasons why governments use public money to pay for the arts and culture, to fund theatres and museums, and so on and so forth. And as a linguist by training, I'm interested in the discursive formations around cultural policy, and particularly I'm interested in discourses of justification for arts funding. And so I have spent many years looking critically at the notion of social impact of the arts, and the idea that the arts can have transformative powers on individuals and society as a key rationale for justifications of arts funding in this country. And so critiques of the way in which impact becomes a proxy for value in policy discourse when it comes to the arts is something that I've looked at historically and in the present time. And therefore, when the impact agenda came to the fore in higher education policy discourses, I couldn't but feel that I had heard all of this stuff before, and I was somewhat troubled by the way in which history, and I'm not very successful in history, seemed to be repeating itself. But then, part of what I've been doing in the past few years is also reflect on what I call here, slightly ironically, my personal impact moral dilemma. And the slightly ironic, if not awkward, situation whereby my years of very critical writing, debunking the rhetoric of impact, then became a ref impact case study, and I had to kind of make sense of that and you know, reassure myself that this was okay, really. So, well, it's not been completely successful, and you know, I see a particular member of the audience laughing, as she was previously an impact officer at Warwick, so we kind of concocted that story.
Sorry,
together.
that's my fault. You had to be
Yes, it's her fault, but I'm trying to make sense of this without blaming her directly. I think I'll start with a little bit of context about my own disciplinary background, just because it's relevant to the discussion on hand. I won't give you a cultural policy studies 101 lecture. I promise you just enough to understand why the whole point of impact and engaging with policymakers has always been quite a delicate area of thinking and reflection for me. Cultural policy research is a very interdisciplinary area of scholarship. It's growing, it's got its own journals now, it's got its own international conferences, and in its own mythological story of itself, or self-narrative. Cultural policy studies is an offshoot of cultural studies in Australia, where a group of scholars started to think about the ways in which culture might be useful, might make itself useful, and the extent to which academics might want to get involved not just in the critical study of culture, but also in advising governments in the administration of culture. So people like Tony Bennett, the sociologist Tony Bennett, wrote a paper in 1992 entitled Useful Culture, which started that debate. Then the field expanded in the UK, where, however, there has been a slightly different take on the relationship between research around culture and the politics of culture and cultural policies, and the ideal distance of the researcher from academia, where cultural scholar Jim McGuigan has constructed this idea of the critical researcher, who should be at a critical distance from policy, uncorrupted by the needs of advocacy and campaigning, and should serve the goal of critique. And pretty much as a PhD student, you kind of choose your camp and stick with it. And having done my PhD in the UK, I guess I felt I belonged to the critical, primacy of critique camp, but I always felt frustrated by what felt like a very sterile dichotomy, and also something that I think didn't do full justice to the potential of research and the duties of research. So I guess from my days as a lowly PhD scholar, I've been trying to figure out, negotiate this dichotomy, and trying to find an alternative for myself that I felt comfortable with, which is what I'm talking about to you about today. Now, because of that slight, that kind of sense that there's two camps, and you need to be clear as to where you are, because it's not purely an orientation decision whether you want to be policy-oriented or not, but there's some kind of implication about whether you are a proper academic. And there's a lot of anxiety in our field, perhaps more than in other fields, about keeping us at a safe distance from sector, keeping a safe distance from the instrumentalization of one's research. And to a degree, what this quote says here is true. in the sense that the sector, the arts and culture sector, have looked at research traditionally with the hope that research could provide arguments, data, statistics that can help them make their case. But my contention is that this is still a very simplistic understanding of the relationship between research and the world, and I think it's also somewhat disingenuous. The whole idea of research as speaking truth to power is, I think, very dubious. First of all, because I think by now we should have worked out that there isn't any single truth that we can speak to anyone. But also, the thing that has always made me uncomfortable about the primacy of critique rhetoric is that kind of sense. It seems to assume academics are somehow outside or looking to the world from some kind of privileged position, whereby they're not implicated in relationships of power, of influence, and they're somehow this neutral bystander that's sort of projecting some kind of critical light into things, which I think is very disingenuous. And I think that one of my gripes with the impact agenda is that to some degree some of the rhetoric around the impact agenda seems to reinforce this idea of the research as the external agent looking to the world. I mean, this idea of the impact of research, as if research was this thing that you just whack on people's heads, or people with, as if you are some other from the society that you want to impact, the people you want to impact, I think is not helpful. And it's just not, it's just a myth, I think. And I speak here as a humanities scholar, there's also, I think, in the resistance and the feeling uncomfortable with the impact agenda, there's also, I would argue, a confidence issue. I don't know how many of you here today identify as a humanities scholar, or whether you're mostly social scientists, but if you are a humanities scholar, pretty much from your undergraduate years, you would have become accustomed to justifying your choice of studies. To people who just can't quite understand why would you waste time and money studying poetry? Why on earth? I think, to me, this quote by James Dyson, He of the Hoover, says it all. And you can imagine if you are a French poetry teacher, why, how can you expect to impact the world, engage when the world kind of think that you're pointless? And there's no point. I could have brought you, I've got a little folder of really, really horrible quotes about humanities, and in my speech, every now, I don't pick my favourites. I could have given you, ministers decrying the pointlessness of arts degrees. There's a whole collection, but I like this one. Well, no, I like this one. I think this is a good one to use, because it's very hard to dismiss this guy as a Philistine, because this guy spent 4 years in art school. So, he's not some kind of engineer or scientist, doesn't get it. He's an arts person. He's a designer. So, what's the point? Let's just all retreat in our ivory tower, with our peers who will understand and appreciate what we do. I mean, I can see that this would be a temptation. Or alternative strategies. If you can't beat them, if you can't convince them that you are worthy, just join them or speak like them. So this is another of my favourite quotes from a recent, not so recent report, but I've seen attended the AHRC is in the process of commissioning a new version of this study. So if you wait patiently enough, I think we'll get some more recent numbers, and I'll bet you they'll be bigger. They'll be bigger. At the moment, we are in, for every £1 spent on the arts and humanities research, you get £10 back in immediate benefit. You can get 15, 20 of long-term benefit. And don't ask me what's the difference between immediate benefit, long-term benefit. I have no idea. The report doesn't say. Doesn't matter. The key message is £1 you put in, £10 you get back, or possibly £1 billion. Who could argue with that? Not even James Dyson, I think. Of course, you're all giggling, and I was at an event a few years ago where poor Mark Llewellyn was presenting this data very sheepishly. I think that we all know this is probably not very sound. calculation. There's no, no indication in the report of how these numbers have been gotten up. But the hope is that Mr. Treasury will be impressed. Of course, if it were that simple, we wouldn't be where we are today. But that's probably a different presentation. However, I think actually impact, despite all the reservations that I do have for the way in which this concept has been formulated and implemented in higher education policy in this country, I think actually impact hits at the heart of some very fundamental questions for academics and for universities, because it implies some questions about how do we understand, describe, articulate the value of what we do beyond ourselves and our peers. It's about the kind of role that we envisage universities having in the 21st century. What does it mean to be a public institution in the context in which we live today? But also, for me as a researcher, it's also asking what comes after critique, and is really the sole purpose of our work to critique, or is there something that we should do, that should come afterwards? And of course, I think the fact I'm here today kind of gives away the fact that my argument would be that of course there has to be something after critique. And then from my own personal point of view, what is then the ideal relationship between scholarly work and the world of creative practice and policy practice, and what kind of relationship would be beneficial both to the world of practice but also to the world of research. On a more personal take, writing about these things has also meant for me to ask myself very personal questions as to what kind of researcher I am, what kind of researcher I feel I ought to be, and then how would I articulate the broader value of what I do, and which is complex because my field is very small. It's not, well acknowledged in the institutional world, and then I have the cheek of being a proud humanities scholar who has the arrogance of claiming that her work is largely historical, textual analysis, has policy relevance. So, how do I explain the value of that to myself and to others? And then, yes, having to then work out my own personal sort of complexity and the slight sense of awkwardness of being aware that there's an apparent, at least, tension between the values that animate my work and then the kind of pressures and expectations of my institution to tick all those boxes around impact and ref impact and all the rest of it. And in trying to make sense of what then should come after critique, if you feel that that's what should happen, I found an article by Ian Ang from 2011 where she expounds the concept of cultural intelligence, quite intriguing. I'm not completely convinced with the solution that she offers, but I'm quite intrigued by how she articulates the problem. So she argues that as academics we revel in complexity. We love complexity, all we do is all about complexifying, it's about problematizing issues. So we're completely uncomfortable with talking about identity. We'd rather talk about identities, and we're about unpacking, unpicking, fleshing out. And she says this is all very well, but in the world in which we live, where we face very complex challenges, that's not very helpful in terms of improving things. And she suggests that cultural intelligence is this quality of recognising that the world is complicated, that there's no straightforward one-size-fits-all for complex problems, but that as scholars we still have the duty to try and simplify our analysis so that they can be a springboard for actual change. She argues that we should aim for a simplicity that rejects simplification or oversimplification, which sounds fine, but I'm not quite sure exactly how you manage that. So I guess in the past few years there have been me trying to work out how do you actually do this, because I think few people would argue the concept, but I think the delicate point here is in the implementation. And so perhaps the solution is actually getting out of the library, getting out of the ivory tower, get into the world and get your hands dirty. And so the rest of my presentation to you today will focus on this high-profile public engagement work that I've been doing for the past couple of years, which is now concluded, although we're planning legacy work, so it's a kind of project that never quite ends, which has been, hence the title of my presentation today, I think the most stressful project I've ever worked on. Never was I expecting to have quite so many sleepless nights from a project that's not even a research project, it's a public engagement project. So you think, you ought to be, 2 years of jollies and coffees and dinners in London, and was actually a bit of a nightmare. But we survived to tell the tale. One little note here: when it was first put to me the possibility of being involved in this project as the academic lead for the Faculty of Arts alongside a social science colleague, I went on the university website because I hadn't really heard about commissions. I didn't quite know what they were. And at the time, the webpage of the Warwick Commission explained these as a series of public engagement projects the university funded. They're funded by the Comms Department, which tells you already how the university sees these things, which were meant to show how social science research carried at Warwick was helping tackle difficult policy issues. So already that offended me a bit. So I thought, what do you mean? The university invests all this money on showing that social science can, the implication that as a humanities, the commissions were not for me, kind of, annoyed me. And I thought, well, let's see if we can do something about that. So I'm proud to say that that is no longer on our website. But the idea is that the commissions are based on an area of expertise at Warwick, and they tend to use that basis of scholarship to develop fresh policy thinking and actually have a policy impact. And this was the first one in which the Faculty of Arts was involved. So the previous ones was one on international financial markets, one on elected mayors, and another one, I can't remember what was about, they were all based in either the economics department or the politics department. So we went to the university with a proposal that the next commission should be about cultural value, and the way that we justified spending 380 grand on something like this was that we felt that there was a real policy moment. There was a lot of anxiety in the arts and culture sector around how to articulate, measure value, and how to put together a case for funding to government in the face of austerity, in the face of a fairly unsympathetic government. And this was also an area where Warwick has dedicated departments and an area of recognised strength. So we felt that we could build on that to develop a collaborative effort with the sector in trying to think, well, on the basis of our scholarship and on the basis of your, practical knowledge, what should we do next? And there were also overlaps between the arts, creative industries, and other key policy agendas that were becoming quite prominent in debate. So education and skills, soft power, tourism, cultural-led economic growth in the creative economy and all that kind of stuff. So we partnered with British Council, the Royal Society for the Arts, the Design Council and Cheltenham Festival, and we just wanted to have, to stimulate public debate and stimulate policy change. These are our commissions. I won't name them all, because also whenever I try and do this, inevitably my mind goes blank and I forget all the names and who they are. But I think it's fair to say that we've got here the great and the good of the arts sector, which was in itself a little bit problematic, because we wanted it to be sort of a national exercise, and we had to recognise that the regions were not very well represented among our commissioners, although that is a feature of the cultural world and cultural policy in this country. So we had, just to name a few, we had Nick Sorota from Tate, we had David Land from the Old Vic, we had Tony Aggie, who's the head of digital archives of BBC, and various other very notable personalities. And this was very much a collaborative effort. So negotiating the relationships, developing trust between us and the commissioners and with the people we were dealing with was very important. But we were quite clear that we wanted to challenge the idea that there's a linear relationship between research and policy development. In the sense that we were quite clear and I guess honest with our commissioners that we weren't just, that we had sort of an intellectual agenda in our involvement in this project, which was based on our knowledge of what the literature and the evidence shows, but I suppose it's also dependent on our values. We have a sense of what the problem was with current cultural policy. We have a sense that we wanted the report to be helpful and constructive, but not necessarily not advocacy. We wanted to be clear that we would expect our commissioners and the sector to receive a bit of tough love, and that we would, not just package a nice case for them to put to funders, but that we would ask awkward questions of them as much as anyone else. But at the same time, we wanted to push the debate beyond the obsession with funding and the equivalence of talking about cultural value with making the case for funding, because it's a lot more complicated than that, of course. And we wanted to find a way to inject findings from research in debates that often happen completely separately from the sphere of academic research, even when the academic research is precisely about those debates, which I think is paradoxical. And we brought together a different range of expertise, where academic expertise and professional expertise were, treated as equal. And I think that's why, ultimately, this kind of project can only ever be a collaborative effort. We weren't directing works, we were sort of coordinating, curating, but we were very much working with our commissioners and with the people that we dealt with in the sector. Now, what we wanted to do was push the debate beyond advocacy, create some longer-term thinking that was richer, more nuanced than just please give us more money or please don't cut money too much. We wanted to also take this debate out of either the academy or the policymakers' offices and turn it into a public conversation with the public about why is culture valuable to their everyday life. And I think the goal certainly for me was getting that academic research, getting that critique out into the real world, because that's where it's most needed, rather than remain trapped in the peer-reviewed pages of a journal that is inaccessible to most of the public. And develop, consolidate our approach to researching these things, developing, strengthening partnerships and collaborations that could be a strategic value. And so this is kind of the institutional side of why it's worth doing this work. So I'll give you the last celebratory slide, and then we'll go into the more juicy bits. I think some things we achieved. I think I am personally very proud, as somebody whose work has been recently about trying to develop a social justice research agenda in cultural policy studies, that we have been able to highlight unequal access to cultural participation as one of the key themes. I think it's important to have somebody like Nitsa Rota signing up to a report that shows data that was coming from a research that was publicly commissioned but never published, that shows that free entry to museums, which is a very expensive flagship policy, cultural policy in this country, has been socially regressive. I think it's important having the Chief Executive of the Arts Council signing up to a document that acknowledges that the benefits of the funded arts are still incredibly socially stratified, so it's just the wealthiest, whitest and better educated portion of the British population that benefit the most from arts and culture paid for by general taxation. I think there's some merit in highlighting the attack that arts education in schools has been under in the past few years. Will it change the world? I don't know, and it depends on what people do with that. But I think that that was important, and that would not have happened if academics hadn't been involved in such an exercise. Some of the data, especially around participation, was data that was being produced by AHRC Connected Communities project, and that wasn't even published yet. But I'm in the project team for that project, so it's not work I've done, but I knew about it, so we were able to put it in front of the Commission before it even came out in a journal. And so we knew where the interesting, important work was being carried out, and we were able to put those researchers in front of our commissioners. I think then, of course, from the point of view of the institution, there was a series of outcomes that were, if I say so myself, ref impact gold. So we were covered by the media, nationally, internationally, and not that much came to it and didn't do him any good, but Ed Miliband's Based is one and only art speech on the Commission, embraced quite a few of our recommendations and turned them into pledges for his manifesto. But we actually have had some indication that even the current government might take up some of our recommendations, such as, for instance, we suggested that no school should be rated as excellent by Ofsted unless it had a really robust arts provision. So that might become policy. So, there was some achievement. So, university is very pleased because we're going to get lots of lovely impact case studies that will potentially score very highly. And then there's some things, some more general things that I feel I've learned from such a grueling project. I think that, which goes back to my way of trying to find an alternative to that kind of, are you a useful researcher or are you a critical researcher? I think relevance is perhaps a more useful notion than usefulness in this context, in the sense that it's important to me as a researcher that when I talk to artists, to creative professionals, to creative administrators and policy makers, what I tell them about their world resonates with them, that they recognise the picture I'm painting. Whether that picture, that work helps them getting more money is really none of my concern. And I'm quite open, when I collaborate with people saying, no, I'm not here to help you get money from the Arts Council, but if you were to find out more about, how do you evaluate your impact properly, we can have a conversation. And I think it's important to respect professional expertise and creative practice. And sometimes I do worry that with the emphasis on co-production that some of the research funders are putting on there when they develop their schemes, that there's not always a sense in which these are all skills and expertise that are equally valued. And so for me, impact it has to be about collaboration and partnership and working with the sector rather than on the sector or for the sector, which are, I think, more limited ways of working. And what we hope to achieve was a culture of knowledge-based practice within the culture sector. I'm very wary, I'm very critical on the notion of evidence-based policy because it's problematic, but the sense that knowledge infuses the debates that happen in the world of practice, I think is very important. So in this respect, you know, I've given you the spiel that I give when I do this kind of things at the university. But here we are at the what was I thinking bit, because even though it was very successful, it was very stressful, and it was very different from doing research. And there are bits of, and inevitably when you are engaged in a project such as this, the final report looks very, very different from the kind of stuff that you write in your research, even if it's about the same things. And that was difficult to negotiate. So it was difficult to negotiate the angry emails that I got when the report came out that said, oh, I can't believe that somebody like you who's done such critical work could write a report that was called Enriching Britain, which is all about the economy. So, well, you know, it's not all about the economy. You know, there's, you know, I would highlight all the sort of social justice points there. And then I would have to explain, of course it doesn't sound like one of my articles, because it's not one of my articles, because if you look at the people who were involved in writing this, there's about 20 of us. And that was difficult. And there were some moments when I would just say, was I thinking like you know, absolutely early, you could be in the library, you know, just now in the peace of the library, why, you know, yeah, what was I thinking when I agreed to do this? But then, as these lovely photos that somebody tweeted, as I was writing down some notes for this, which was all very apt, I still think it was worth it. I'm not going to do it again anytime soon, because I think I need another 2 years to recover from this, but I'm glad I did it. And this is why I am still doing it. I think ultimately the reason why those of us who see themselves as publicly engaged, who do impact work which is time-consuming, resource-intensive, which still carries very little formal recognition by universities. I mean, something like that did nothing for my health and not much for my career advancement either. But the reason why we still do it is because we believe in the public value of research, in the notion that the home of research is in the world, that research is too important to be trapped in an article or in a book, and that critique is only the first crucial step of the research process, because of course you need to have something to bring to engage the public or sectors, policy sectors with. But it can, you know, the commitment to this kind of work comes from the notion that facilitation of that collaborative process that comes after the moment of critique is part and parcel of being a researcher. It's not an add-on, it's just a core part of the job. And I think that while some aspects of the impact agenda are questionable, the aspiration that research should be active in the world, should make a difference, however small that difference might be, is not questionable. Of course, the reality is also that once you've put your research out into the world, you've facilitated the process by which people come across it and might, you know, understand it and appreciate it. What people then do with that knowledge is kind of out of your hand, and it becomes about individual responsibilities. So, you know, I do hope that after 2 years of talking to them, individually, informal events, that the art sector does take up the point that we've made about how, creative professionals working in our national cultural institutions are too ethnically non-diverse, too socially non-diverse, that, you know, you can hope that they do something with it, but you can't make them. Which is where I think the problem with the impact agenda is, that we are sort of charged with the responsibility of making the change happen, as if we could, force that. And I think that ultimately the thought I'll leave you with is that ultimately what the biggest learning from these 2 years is that ultimately the key to successful impact and public engagement. And I know that these might sound a bit controversial, is mastering the art of what I call acceptable compromise. Accepting that when you are involved in collaboration with other people who might be from the university world, or indeed, but even more so from outside the university, you're not leading the agenda, you're working with them, and the final product, whether it's an event, a report, whatever it is, won't be the kind of pure reflection of your thought, thinking and values as our academic writing is. But at the same time, its value lies precisely in being beyond the individual, but being the expression of a view that's been negotiated. And believe me, there were negotiations on that report. It's not a very long report, but there were complex negotiations on individual words. And so the value is in the fact that it's a joint effort. And so for me, I think the key learning is learning at what point that compromise feels like you're losing integrity, and being able to be firm about not crossing that line, but learning to be comfortable with leaving near that line, and also living with the fact that some of your colleagues, your even close colleagues, won't understand why you are living in that danger area, which is that line, rather than being in the library where it's safe and comfortable, and you get the books and you get the promotion. So I think with this thought, I leave you. So there is life after impact and engagement, but it's a lot of work. So thank you very much.
No, that's right. Thank you very much.
I wanted to check that was the